Do you struggle with compression? Do you wish there was a way to find the perfect compressor setting every time? Well, stick around because that's exactly what we're going to answer in this video. Hey guys, this week I'm doing a video about how to find that perfect compressor setting every time. But before I begin, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for new videos each week. And if you head on over to learnaudioengineering.com, you can join my email list and I will send you a free copy of my best-selling book, How to Record Anything with Clarity and Character. So this process I'm going to teach you today, I actually learned during my first internship. My mentor, Terry Tran, taught me this process, and he had me imagine that each compressor was like a safe that needed to be cracked in order to unlock the rich tonal treasure within. So he described finding the perfect setting like being a safe cracker, turning the dial and listening for the pins as each one falls into place, alerting you that you're getting closer to that fat, gooey compression. Now, I do promise that this process is super simple and a lot of fun once you get the hang of it. So there's two parts to it. There's how we prep the compressor, and then there's how we crack it. So first, we want to begin with the compressor in a neutral position. Keep the threshold high to avoid gain reduction for now. And we're going to flip the compressor on and off using the bypass switch to adjust the makeup gain to make sure that both signals are matched. Now we're going to set the controls to a max ratio, slowest attack, and the fastest release. And then we're going to lower the threshold a bit so that it begins compressing. Great, our compressor is set up and ready to be cracked open. So a little quick review. At this point, we're trying to avoid the loudness bias. So before we go dialing in that perfect tone, we want to make sure that we match the gain with the bypassed signal to ensure the truest comparison. And once we got that gain matched, we're going to begin with the most aggressive compression for the shortest duration. Now this min-max approach is going to allow us to hear the extreme character of each compressor. So the first dial that we're going to adjust is the attack time. Simply reduce the attack to adjust the brightness and the presence of each signal. Listen to how the transient slams into the compressor and shapes the tone of each peak. If we keep a slower attack, we keep the punchiness. With our fast attack, we're going to start to take some of that away and get a bit of a darker sound. That's all we're going to focus on for the first knob. Second, we're going to gradually slow down the release until the pump of compression works with the tempo or until we have the glue that we need holding all the notes in place. A slower release is going to keep a firm hold on the signal, whereas a faster release will allow the space between those peaks to breathe a little bit more. Again, if some of these terms seem a little strange to you, please check out my first video where I talk about the compression envelope and attack and release settings and how those can adjust the tone and character of the signal. So definitely check that video out. After you've timed the attack and release, we're going to move on to the ratio and lower it to a more conservative amount of compression. This will ultimately depend on how the compressor reacts with the instrument. Sometimes a high ratio can do some really cool stuff to the color of the sound, but sometimes you might want to move to a lower ratio of 2:1 or 4:1 to keep some dynamics and allow those peaks to push back against the rubber band of compression. And the last step is to reset the threshold to the desired amount of compression. Throughout this process, it's normal for the amount of compression to fluctuate largely due to the attack setting and the ratio, which controls how fast and how hard the transient slams into the compressor, which ultimately determines the amount of gain reduction. And if you do this process on any instrument, I guarantee that you will find a sound that works. By setting up the compressor this way and focusing on one control at a time, it's much easier to dial in that perfect setting that fits in with your mix. And if you don't like the way the compressor sounds, you can move on to a different one, and over time, make note of which model or plugin you like for specific instruments. So next, I'm going to demonstrate this compressor cracking process on a few different instruments, and then I'll share one of my own techniques, which expands on this concept using two compressors in series for vocals. Check it out. So this is a song called Wanted for Murder by my band Old Jack Tap. These are some stems from our first album, and I'm just going through them. And I'm going to show you how you can use this compressor method on a few different instruments. Let's have a listen.
If
Cool. So the first thing that we're going to work on is the bass. Now I've got here our compressor setup. And what we're going to do is set up our max ratio, slowest attack, fastest release. And I'm going to keep the threshold set where it is. But normally you would just kind of listen to it and make sure that it's compressing somewhat. Actually, I'll dip it down a little bit. And right now it's not actually compressing anything because the attack time is so slow. And this is something that you'll find is as you go through this, especially with plugins that can go to much greater extremes than hardware, you're going to need to fiddle around with the threshold and the output gain a little bit throughout this process. So we'll start with the attack. And the release. So I might do a bit of a lower threshold, bit of a slower release then, just to catch the tails of some of those longer notes. But yeah, this is sounding pretty good. So we ended up with a bit of a faster attack, medium, slow release, and a pretty high ratio of almost 8-to-1. So sometimes what you might do is you might put two compressors in series. This is something that I like to do for bass or for vocals to really keep something in place and get a lot of stability out of it. Some compressors don't have all the controls that I've mentioned in the last two videos. So sometimes you have something like the LA2A where you have a peak reduction knob and you have a gain knob. So one of the things you can do is you can start with peak reduction at 0 and then just match the gain. Because I've already done this, the gain is matched. And then you're just gonna turn up that one knob until it starts compressing. Okay, so let's compare before and after this compression. So another compressor that doesn't have attack and release settings is the DBX 160. Now with this, we really only have the threshold, the compression ratio, and then the makeup gain. So I've got this on the drums, which is a really classic setup. Cool, so this adds a little bit of punch to it, a little bit of movement, and really helps to bring the vibe and the flow to the song, the groove out. Okay, next we'll talk about the guitars. Now, our guitars are not too distorted, but they're still coming out of a crunchy amp, so we're not really going to need that much compression to keep them in place. Having said that, the left guitar here, the one that I'm playing, is going to be the rhythm roll, and then the right guitar here that Andrew's playing is a line that's on top of that that's supposed to be a little bit brighter. So we'll see what we can do to make these contrast each other and work together in the mix. Let's just solo the two guitars. Another thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to the graph setting here so you can see how the compressor is pushing down and releasing. It's really cool. Okay, so for the attack knob here, for most of the stuff in the verses and the chorus, I'm playing a lot of the rhythm parts. So I've chosen a faster attack so that we can really keep that staying put and in place. Whereas for Andrew, who's playing single notes and they're higher notes, I want a little bit of the brightness to come out. So I've chosen a bit slower of an attack time. Now for the release, I'm thinking that for me, it's going to have a slower release for the left side and a slightly faster release for the right. Let's have a listen. And I really like just the rhythm that we're playing kind of goes back off of each other, and the movement of the compressor kind of creates this back and forth, side to side kind of thing. It's really cool. So now we're going to lower the ratios to something a little bit more conservative. So what this does is just gives a little bit of bounce to it. When you have a very high ratio, it can sound very stiff and it can make the instrument sound very small. But when you have a lower ratio, the instrument is able to push back against that rubber band, as I was talking about in the first video, and it makes it sound a lot bigger and it has a lot more movement to it. Okay, and finally we'll talk about our vocals. Now, as I mentioned, one thing that I like to do is have two compressors going into each other in series. This is a really great technique. So what we're going to do is keep the threshold high on one of them, and we're just going to start with the first compressor. Okay, so as you can see, this first one, we've set up a faster attack and release, and this is going to really grab all of the peaks, all the attack of the words. And with the second one, what I want to do is just smooth out the signal and make the rest of it very even and make sure that every syllable is audible. So for that, I'm going to have a bit slower of attack, bit slower of a release. So I like just looking at the difference there on the screen. For the first compressor, we have it really changing the amount, really pushing back on those peaks, whereas the other one is just sort of like sitting there and keeping everything at an even level. So the result of these two working together is going to be a very steady, very consistent vocal sound where we're going to be able to hear all of the nuances of the words and the timbre of the voice and everything. It's going to be really consistent and really great. So next we're going to again lower the ratio to a more conservative level so that we keep some of the life of this vocalist. Okay, great. Now let's compare before and after. So I hope you enjoyed this video and got something out of the process. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you'd like to recall this process in the future, I've put together a free downloadable cheat sheet of the compressor cracking process that you can find in the description below. So coming up next on our series, we'll learn about the different types of compressors, and I'll show off a few of my own hardware units in a battle royale compression shootout. Until next time.